While we're getting that, just a quick bit about me. My name is Eric Zackrison. I'm actually a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara in the technology management program. So I teach management, strategy, leadership at both the undergrad and grad level. I've got a number of courses on LinkedIn Learning as well. I think we've got 12 up there. I've got a consulting firm, and then I control the rights to a behavioral styles instrument called Interpersonal Dynamics Inventory, which, interesting enough, was developed by my father and actually used significantly in Africa for many years. He was spent half of his time in Zimbabwe, did a lot of work in Zimbabwe and South Africa and Botswana and a number of countries when I was young. So I'm super excited to be able to speak with you today. Lovely. I know it's hopefully you're having a great start to your day. It is the end of mine. I actually got a new ring light, so actually I had good lighting today. But I'll start a little bit before that. So when I started thinking about what to talk about today, knowing it was going to be critical thinking, there's a lot of different directions I could go there, especially thinking about progressing onward and forward. And it got to me thinking about a couple of key moments in my life that were particularly challenging. So one was I'd opened my first restaurant. I was a restaurateur for most of my career. Went back to school, got my PhD. So opened a fine dining restaurant. I had actually converted a 150-year-old building into a beautiful space. And it had been going well. And then we'd opened in 2002. And then in 2007, 2008, we had an economic downturn. We actually it took us to below break even. And my ego got the best of me. And I kept thinking, well, I can turn it around. And I let it keep going, and I was using another restaurant that was doing well and taking money from it to support it and keep it going. And kind of had a moment where I got a realization. I had two pieces of mail in one day. One was from the IRS tax agency telling me that I owed money that I needed to pay right away. The other was my utility company saying we had to pay our utility bill or we were going to be shut off. And it made me realize that I needed to figure out where I was going. There was a lot of uncertainty. I had a lot of employees working for me, figuring out what I was going to do. The other time it really resonated, there was actually two pieces, and it was the same thing all of us suffered through. It was March of 2020. So I was teaching, and 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, they said, we're going to go remote, and then we'll figure out from there. At the same time, the restaurant, my last restaurant in Springfield, Missouri, was forced to close down by government. And again, the issue was figuring out, so what am I going to do? And in both of those, especially the second one, I knew it wasn't alone. People face these kind of things all the time. And though these are relatively extreme, we face these times in our life where we're trying to figure out what we can do, how we can go forward. And a lot of times we freeze and we spin out and just worry and get too caught up in trying to figure out what can I do? When can I do it? Maybe I just need to worry about it, et cetera. And it made me think back to my grandfather. My grandfather was a classic kind of, watch an old Western and look for the Ranger. That was my grandfather. He was just tough and rough. But he would say to me in these times, he would say, there's never a reason to worry, because either you can do something about it, so find out what that is and do it, or you can't. So figure out how you're going to adapt. He would say that worrying is nothing but an exercise in futility. And so with that, I kind of want to take you through both of those approaches to be able to give you some tools that will allow you to better manage your challenges going forward and be more successful. So As I said, my grandfather would say, there's never anything to worry about. That either you can do something about it, so do it, or you can't, so figure out how you're going to adapt. So the first part of this is, can you do something about it, right? So if the answer is yes, there's a few things you can think about. One is, okay, so maybe there's something I can do about it. I need to figure out where there's uncertainty and where there's risk. Then I need to make sense of that. I need to see if there's any ambiguity in it and resolve that ambiguity. I need to make clarity. I need to always assess time constraints. And that's something that we have to think about anytime we're thinking about decision-making, critical thinking, problem solving, because there's always at some point a trade-off, right? There's always going to be information that we can get more information, but at some point, the amount of energy and time and resources we spend to solve it outweigh the actual benefits. So we always have to think about that. And then we always have to think about checking biases. So if we go to the idea of resolving uncertainty, and this is the first place we should think about, and it's a matter of, okay, so what don't I know? What information can I get so that I can make a good decision? So part of it is doing your research. So for me, in the first instance, when I was, actually, better one is when we had to close down the restaurant for COVID. I knew that there was a lot of uncertainty. There were certain things I knew I wasn't going to be able to find out. But I certainly could figure out how I could take care of my employees, what the rules and regulations were for any of us being in the building. Could we do delivery food? Like, I could do my research and find out what information was out there. I could also find out who I could talk to, right? So maybe I didn't know the information, but I could find out to see who were the people that information was going to be coming from when it did come. So the first thing is do your research, making sure that when you're doing your research, you're aware of your sources, that you're using good quality sources, and you're avoiding bias. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The second piece about resolving uncertainty is talking to people. And that includes just the people around you, but also seeking out team members, experts, friends, anybody that can give you more insight, specifically thinking about getting other perspectives. If we can get other perspectives, it's a powerful way to get away from our own kind of silo and thinking about what we're doing. You can reflect on the past and think about, okay, so have I been through something like this before? What did I do there? How did I get through it? Were there things that worked and didn't work? Maybe you can think about something, maybe it was way different, but you've been challenged before. What did you do to get past that? Because you got past it, you're here today. So what allowed you to kind of get to where you are? And then the last piece here is you can think about doing some experimentation. So when I realized that we were under break even, we were either going to need to close the restaurant or do something else, we started testing some things out. We tried opening up for lunch. We tried doing some delivery. Small things that allowed us to kind of, does this work? Does this not work? So that you can kind of get past and get some clarity on what some of the options are. Once you've got information, though, there's also a concern of figuring out, does that information make sense or not? So ambiguity is different than uncertainty. Uncertainty is stuff that we can get more information on and usually clear up some uncertainty. Ambiguity is when what we're getting is difficult to understand. And there's a lot of, it makes sense when we think about it, that ambiguity is there. Specifically thinking about some aspects of our communication. One is that language isn't precise. The fact that we call something a dog is completely arbitrary. We could have called it anything else, and it would be the same thing. That language is abstract, that the word dog is not the physical thing, it's a representation of it. And because of that abstraction, it can make it difficult to understand for me to create a message and then you to interpret it the way I mean. I could say the word dog. If I said, I have a dog, or I'd like you to help me out by watching my dog this weekend. Many of you are probably thinking of drastically different dogs. Some of you may be thinking about a Chihuahua that's a little, 5 or 10 pound barking pain in the butt. Some of you might be thinking of a golden retriever. that is, 40, 50 pounds and is a hunting dog. Some of you may be thinking of a bull mastiff that's 167 pounds. But it's not your fault that you're not knowing what I'm saying. It's mine, because I'm too abstract in my language use. And then there's the aspect that language is ambiguous. And it's ambiguous for a variety of reasons, right? One is, especially English is terrible about this. We have so many words that mean so many different things. One that always bothers me, the word note, right? So if I say the word note, I could mean I note something, I notice it. I could mean write down a note. I could mean a musical note. And then the fact that language changes meaning over time. Then there's the aspect of biases and perception, that we have this idea that what we observe is objective reality. And it quite literally isn't. It is what we pay attention to. So there's a video that exists that I have my students watch when we do this. It's called The Monkey Illusion. And in The Monkey Illusion, the audience is asked to watch this video, and there is 6 people, 3 in white, 3 in black, passing a basketball back and forth. And you're asked to watch how many times the team in white passes the ball. And about halfway through the video, a guy in a gorilla suit walks across, looks at the camera, beats his chest, and then walks off camera. So generally, most people get pretty close to the number of basketball throws, 16. 50% of people do not see the gorilla. They don't see him at all. They don't notice that the gorilla was there. And so if I and one of you were talking 2 weeks later, and I say, man, you remember that video with the gorilla? You'd be like, what, are you crazy? Our realities are based on what we observe. So if you experience something different than I experience, we're going to end up with ambiguity and not understand how to figure out what's going on. And then we have the complexity of communication. That I'm here creating this message, but that is bounded by my cultural experiences, my history, my education, my vocabulary, all the things that I know and experience. And I'm creating this message and I'm sending it to you. But you're interpreting all of that bounded by your own cultural experiences, your own history, your own knowledge, your own education. Now, some of you maybe have watched some of my LinkedIn videos, and so you have a little bit more of a relationship with me. Some of you haven't. But we think about all those things together, and of course we have a lot of ambiguity. So how do we resolve it? Well, some of it's relatively simple. One is we need to focus on our own assumptions, that we draw on assumptions regularly. And the problem with assumptions are they are by definition drawing on our own interpretation to fill in blanks. And the more that we do that, the more likely we are to be interpreting the message or the intent different than it was designed for. So if we just stop, and if we've made a decision, if we've made a claim, if we've identified a reason somebody's doing something, if we stop every once in a while and go, how did I get here? Did I use good quality data, evidence, or did I see something and draw on my memory of something else to fill in that blank? Second piece is to establish expectations. And that's even in simple things. Like all of us have probably had somebody not message us back. Like we've texted them or called them and we didn't hear back the next day or the next hour or whatever. And what do? We go, man, are they mad at us? I don't know. They could be mad at me. I don't think I did anything that made them mad. When they're just like, oh no, I just didn't message back. I didn't get to it in time. I didn't realize that to you it meant that I was mad at you. So sometimes it's a matter of establishing those expectations, right? How quickly should we respond to each other? What is kind of the way we're working together? All those sorts of things, talking about that and resolving those expectations. Avoiding abstractions. The more clear I can say. So if I say, hey, can you please watch my dog this weekend? It's a 5-pound Chihuahua that doesn't particularly like people, but you just come in, feed it, and go. Okay, that's clear. Right? Or I need you to watch my dog Pipsqueak, who's a 200-pound Mastiff. He eats a ton, but he's super sweet. Okay, All right, get away from those abstractions and be specific. And then the final one is asking questions. And asking questions is one way that we can both resolve ambiguity for ourselves and for others. So if somebody is not establishing good expectations with you or is abstract with you, ask things like, can you help me understand that? Where are you coming from there? What specifically do you mean? But we can do the same thing to check if we are doing the same thing to others. So we can say, so what did you hear me say? What are you thinking? What do you think is the next step? So we can check others' interpretations of us. Once we've kind of thought through the uncertainty side and we've cleared up as much as we can, and then we've taken that information and eliminated as much ambiguity as we can, then we need to make sure that we're not falling into some common bias traps. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will make the PowerPoint available after the speaking. All you do is just email me or hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to share it with you. But there are a couple of these I want to hit that are really common. One is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the idea of we tend to, when we go look for information, find stuff that supports what we already think. See it all the time in political conversations in the United States. Right? So I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. Time to do my own research and find the own truth. The first thing we see, literally the first link that agrees with you with what you already believe, done, and you stop. So what we all have a tendency to do this unconsciously. So how do we get past it? You search for stuff, you specifically look for things that disconfirm what you believe. So you search out things that disconfirm, then you look at the two things that confirm, things that disconfirm, and you judge which one is higher quality, which one is better, has better sourcing, etc. The second one is availability bias, and this is a really interesting one because it ties to so much of our understanding of history, right? If you think about kind of historical facts, where do historical facts come from? Well, it comes from the people that wrote the history. And so we don't know what else might have happened because we don't have availability of that information. But it happens, it's a reality in our everyday decision making as well. One of my favorite examples of this is from World War II, that when planes were coming back, they were obviously in World War II, lots of planes didn't come back to the air bases after fighting over Europe and over the Asia Pacific. Right? And so they were trying to look and decide, how do we make sure these planes survive these battles more effectively? And so they were looking at where the bullets were hitting. And what they found is that bullets were hitting certain areas much more often than others. So on the tips of the wings, kind of the central place, and on the tail. And so their first instinct was, oh, we need to put more armor at these places because it'll protect the planes more. But somebody went, wait a minute. These are the planes that make it back. We need to be thinking about the fact that these planes are able to survive with these bullet holes, which means the other planes are probably getting hit in those other locations, and that's why they're going down. So because this is the available information, we go, oh, well, that's what we're making our decision on. Sometimes we need to step back and go, no. There's more information here. What we need to do is we need to put armor on those points that aren't coming back, because that's the things that's bringing the planes down. So in our own lives, it's a matter of making sure we're collecting enough data that we're not stopping with just what we have, and we're looking outside that we're bringing in other voices when we can to assess what we've got. The last one I want to talk about is anchoring, and this is an interesting one in that we tend to, the first bit of information, especially if we're thinking about numbers, budgets, that sort of stuff, but also decisions that have like pros or cons. We tend to be biased towards the number that we're giving. There's a ton of research on this. One that really demonstrates it is this study that looked at real estate. What they did is they had real estate agents who were all experts. I mean, these were all real estate agents that had been in the industry for a long time. And before they looked at these houses, they were told, here's the listing price. And it was 119, 129, 139, 149, all the same houses. What they found was that that number correlated with the appraised value that they gave the house, the willingness to pay for the house, and the lowest acceptable offer. So despite the fact that these people were experts, they still were biasing their final guesses on this initial information. So here, we need to try to avoid extreme starting points, reframe if possible, and look for kind of argue counterfactuals, look for what ifs. So what can you do? First thing you do, if you're like, I don't know what to do, is see what you can. First thing you do is seek out information. Try to consider multiple frames, looking at it from different angles. Ask good questions. Identify and avoid pressures that lead to bias. But there's times where you look for the information, you try to find it, and you're still like, man, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. And in both of these situations, that when I realized that the restaurant wasn't making enough money to go forward, and at the beginning of COVID, for both my restaurant and my teaching, I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I was stuck for a minute. And I was feeling for a moment that things were outside my control. And so, again, I went back to what my grandfather said, and I said, well, okay, so even if I can't do anything, I have to figure out how I'm going to live with this how can I adapt this new reality? And so in that kind of adaptation part, I realized I learned 3 kind of cool tricks. And these are the ones I want to talk to you a little about. So it's understanding locus of control, focus of control, and then some self-management. So when we talk about locus of control, it is this idea of where do we feel like a control exists? Some people feel like they make things happen, that the world that they live in is under their control. So they make things happen. Look what I can do, those kind of comments. Other people feel like the world does things to them, that control is outside, whether that's fate or destiny or luck or whatever the case. And the interesting thing here is we know from research that those people that have an internal locus of control have a lot of benefits in their life. Everything from happier and optimistic. They tend to have lower levels of stress and lower levels of illness due to stress. That they tend to have higher job performance, all sorts of things. The thing is that you can build this as a skill. You can learn how to, regardless of whether you are one of these folks that are completely external locus of control or internal. You can use skills to get better at realizing the world is at least some things under your control. But the problem is that in reality, the vast majority of things are outside your control. You can't control the weather. You can't control other people's opinions of you. You can't control COVID. You can't control your boss being in a bad mood. Like, we can't control any of that. So the first thing you do is realize that it's okay, right? In fact, it's normal. You can't control everything, nor should you. What you can do, though, is pay attention to what you pay attention to. So Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read it, it is one of the most timeless self-help books out there, and it's rock solid as far as its use. But one of the things he talks about is this idea of circle of concern and circle of control. That when we focus our energy on the economy, the news, political views of others, other people's thoughts about us, all those things we can't control. If we spend most of our time there, of course we're going to feel like the world's out of our control. because that's what we're paying attention to. It's why, you know, I've got a friend of mine that watches or listens to true crime podcasts all the time. And she's always like, man, it's so dangerous. And I was like, it's not dangerous. It's just that all you do is listen to stories about people being murdered. Of course you think people get murdered a lot, right? But it's not necessarily there. So focus on things instead. Focusing your energy on those things you can control, right? What do you read? What exercises you do? What ideas do you come up with? Who are you spending time with? All of those sorts of things that you have control. The more you do that, the more likely you will feel in control of yourself. Now, the thing is we will be faced with things that you go, I don't know. I don't know. And what you can do then is stop and do an activity to actually list the things. So when COVID hit and I had to close down my restaurant, again, lots out of my control. And so I actually did this activity. I sat down and I said, what's out of my control? Well, again, can't control the fact that I don't have any work for my employees. I don't have any money to pay them coming in, so I don't have any work for them. I can't control the fact that I can't pay rent. I can't control the fact that we can't open our business. Any number of things. Right? So I put some of those things down and I said, okay, but what can I do? And I got to thinking, I was talking to my general manager. I kept her on and just paid her out of my pocket. That was one thing I could control. I was lucky enough to still be teaching, so I had my money. I had money coming in. I said, so that's one thing I can do. And then got to talk to her. I was like, well, what information can we find? And so I found a bunch of information. I said, I can control where I'm looking for information and who I'm talking to. I can control the way that I talk to my team. I can support them in other ways. So with all of my staff, I said, here's what's going on. Here's my phone number to talk to me. I'm here anytime you need. Here's some resources. And then I help them fill stuff out. I then had that information. I'm like, okay, so I can't do much work. What can I do? Well, I went out in the community and started doing some work with some local organizations because I'd already gathered all this information. I was able to then go out and help other small businesses manage the same thing. I realized that I could still do, I could convert a lot of my consulting and coaching that I mostly did in person to online. So I started doing more and more of that. I realized that I could learn more about other types of ways that we could move the restaurant once we were open to be successful, right? So once I started doing that, I started going, okay, no, it's okay, right? It's not great, but there are some things I can control. So with these last two things, this is one of the things I'd like all of you to do. I want you to think of something that you feel is challenging for you right now. And I want you to write down and think about, not right now, but sometime today, this afternoon, write down what you can control and start managing that a little bit. So there's one last trick I want to talk about here, and this is the idea of anchoring your attitude. So one of the things that interrupts the ability to think critically and the ability to really resolve these issues for ourselves is when we aren't mentally in a space to do it. And there are some things that we can do that keep us in that space, right? That these maintenance anchors, that when we do them regularly, it allows us to manage those times that are more troublesome, more difficult, and that feel more out of our control more effectively. For me, there's two things. Sleep, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, so I'm not going to be a very good critical thinker tomorrow. So sleep. If I need to get 7 hours of sleep, if I don't respond as quickly as well to my kids. I don't think as clearly, etc. The other one is exercise. And now I know I don't look like a runner, but I run 3 to 5 days a week, right? And I know that if I don't get my run in, I don't feel as energized. I don't feel as ready to face the day. For you, it could be any number of things, right? Maybe it's meditation. That's another really good one. Meditating 3 or 4 days a week, or cooking for yourself, or spending time with your kids, or whatever. But we should all have those things. Now, the trick is if you don't have one, find one and develop it. But habits take some time. So give it you really need to do things like 20 to 40 times before they become habitual. So keep at it and develop it. But then we have to think about those times that sometimes, man, you're in the middle of the day and your boss says something, your boss is mad and says something to set you off. Or you deal with a customer that's just a pain in the butt. Or you don't feel good, or you've got a family member sick, or whatever that just makes it in the moment, makes it hard to deal with things. So you need to be thinking about what can you kind of keep in your pocket to bring out to get you back in that space, to get you back ready to deal with the challenges you're facing, ready to move forward, ready to kind of focus on your future and your success. For me, it's deep breathing. Right? I don't meditate in the morning as much as I should, but deep breathing during the day is huge for me. So if I'm feeling super stressed, like I just got an email and realized I forgot to get back to somebody, or whatever, if I just take a second and I take a minute, 2 minutes, and just let that go for a second, I'm able to come right back to the space. Some people it's taking a walk or whatever the case is. So again, I want you to think about sometime today, sit down and go, what can I do as maintenance anchors to make sure I'm there? Do I have some things? Am I doing them consistently? What are some repair anchors that you can bring to the table? Sorry. So key takeaways here. Remember, there's never a need to worry. I know it feels like it. I know it's easy to get in that churn where you're just worried and worried and worried. But instead, right, where does worry exist? Worry exists in the past, and you allow it to ruin your present, which messes up your future. You can't do anything about the past. You can't change it. The only thing that you can affect is the future. So instead of worrying, stop and say, all right, can I do something about this? If so, what is it? If I can't, how am I going to adapt going forward? Applying these tools are going to make you better decision makers, better critical thinkers, and is going to make your future much more successful. So I've got in the slide deck a couple books that I recommend that kind of get around this idea of resolving ambiguity and decision making. But I also would love it if you guys reach out to me. I've got my websites here. Connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you and chat about any of this, but I'll open it up for questions now.